Hello and welcome to my next video. We're going to talk about a topic that generally interests students quite a bit, and that's money. So certainly money has existed for a long time, but it didn't exist forever. It hasn't existed forever. And so before there was actually something called money that we'll define here later, there was barter. And of course, barter is where we're exchanging goods for goods or goods for services or services for services. There's two main problems with barter. One is the double coincidence of wants, and here's what I mean by that. I have to have something that I want to barter, but then I've got to go find someone that has what I'm wanting, and they have to want what I have. So there's a lot of search time that could be involved now with the internet and things that has made it easier to barter. You have Facebook Marketplace, those kind of places. But that's still obviously when there was no technology in terms of modern technology, that was a major issue. Then there's actually a large number of prices. Notice I have that in quote, exchange ratios is really what we're talking about when you have a barter. So I'm going to quickly go through a little simplified example. So let's say we have this little area, and the only thing that's produced and bartered is knives, axes, wood, chickens, hogs, and leather. Uh, I came up with this in terms of what actually people could survive on. Maybe we could do away with axes. I don't know, but that's pretty handy for cutting wood for sure. So to keep it where we can handle it, there's just 6 items, and then I've got K for knives and so on and so forth. So if we are bartering, in other words, exchanging knives for axes, knives for wood, knives for chickens, axes for chickens, so on and so forth, we can see knives for axes, knives for wood. In other words, we would have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 exchange ratios of knives for other things. But then we would have 4 exchange ratio of axes for other things other than knives, and so on and so forth. So there's a total of 15 exchange ratios or prices, if you will. Now, that's not really a huge number. Of course, it's a limited number of items too, but it gets exponentially harder in terms of the larger number of prices if we go up in numbers. This is actually a combination, so I'm going to use the combination formula. The exclamation means factorial, which is like 10 factorial would be 10 times 9 times 8 times 7 times 6 on down to times 1. So if we had 10 items, the formula would be 10 factorial over 2 factorial. The 2 is that we're taking 2 at a time over 10 minus 2 parentheses factorial. And we can do some reducing, and so that ends up giving us, there would be actually 45 different prices, if you will, exchange ratios, if we just had 10 items. Let's go up to 100. So 10 times the number of items, that would be 10 times 10. Notice it goes up by over 1,000 times in terms of 45 compared to almost 5,000. At 1,000 items, 500,000 almost. 10,000 items, 50 million. So this would be undoable in terms of knowing the exchange ratios if we had a modern economy with all these different items. And so every economy, there has been an evolution of something we call money. Now, I know most of you will say, well, I know what money is, but actually, maybe you do, maybe you don't. So let's go and define money. And one way that we can do it is kind of the old saying, similar to the old saying, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's a duck. So we're going to look at things, and if they have the functions of money, we would consider that money, or at least some of the functions of money. It would be near monies. So money is a medium of exchange. What does that mean? That means it's a third item that people willingly trade into. So I'll give a little story later of illustration of that. But, well, I don't necessarily want the green pieces of paper. Again, I know nowadays that's really not what it is, but it's easier to think of it that way. But I know those green pieces of paper, I can take them and then trade for for what I want to. And it really facilitates that change. It reduces in a big time way that double coincidence of wants problems. I don't have to go search out for what I actually want, and then they have to want what I have. I just have to uh, sell my item for money, and then I can take that money and get what I want. So that's a medium of exchange. It's a third item. It's also a unit of count. When you get paid, you don't get paid. Well, most of us don't nowadays in roosters or hogs or eggs or whatever. Certainly that does occur, but for the most part, we're going to get paid, and it's going to be in dollar amounts. In other words, we can say, well, my my hourly wage rate is $20 an hour, for example. So money is a unit of account. The $20 is money, and it's a unit of account. It's a measure of money. The $20, the dollars. Store value. Yeah, I can take those little green pieces of paper and hold on to them, or preferably put them into a savings account or some other way and store that so that it in the future I can pull that out and then use that to buy things. So it represents future purchasing power. So things that are medium have the functions of being a medium of exchange, unit of account, store value. That's money. Now another way of thinking about liquidity, money is with thinking about it. It's the most liquid asset. And when economists talk about liquidity, we're in general talking about the ability. Now, I have a broader definition than most books, so I'll give you a warning up front. So, my definition of liquidity is the ability to convert one asset. Asset is just a thing of value you own. Convert one asset from one form to another form quickly and easily and without substantial loss of value. In other words, if I have $1 and I go in and let's say a soda, or a better example nowadays might be a candy bar at 50 cents, um, I can buy that for 50 cents. I don't run into the situation generally when I go up and they say, well, it shows 50 cents, but you're really going to have to pay $1 because you're giving me green pieces of paper. So money is the most liquid asset. You can convert money into other assets quickly and easily and without substantial loss of value. There are other desirable characteristics of money. I really don't want to go into great detail, but for example, bananas would not be a good thing to use for money because they're perishable. We wouldn't want to use huge rocks for the most part, although those have been used for money. Because they're not easily transportable and you can't, and they're not easily divisible. So there are several desirable characteristics of money that over time there's certain assets that have been more desirable to use as money than others. And certainly one item that historically has been used for money is gold. And I don't want to take a huge amount of time here, but I've got what's called a fractured fairy tale I relate quite often. And so fractured means that it's really not exactly the way it happened, but this will give the flavor of how money evolved. So back in Mario, England, there was this goldsmith that was an excellent jeweler, making jewels and using gold for other purposes. So he stored a lot of gold for his own business in this little village. Well, he also had to have high security because of all that gold he held in a little cave that was his storage, let's say. So he hired people to guard that cave. It turned out that all these rich noblemen that had these feudal estates surrounding this little village, they were wealthy too. So they would all hold some of their wealth in the form of gold, but each one then would have to have their own security. Well, one enterprising nobleman one day decided, you know what? Since this goldsmith in the little village has really good security, why don't I just pay him a little to store my gold? And then anytime I need it to make a large purchase, I can go and get it because the village is real close. And so goldsmiths started becoming stores of gold, not only for use for their own purposes of making jewelry and the like, but also for monetary purposes. And then one day, this goldsmith, hypothetical goldsmith, had some issues, some illness issues in the family. And so there was all this gold in his vault. A lot of it was not his, but he really had an emergency come along. So I'm just going to, this is the goldsmith speaking, I'm just going to borrow some of that gold because typically these wealthy guys, they hold on to the money and leave it in there anyway, unless they're making a large trip abroad or somewhere. And actually, generally, what they have happen is even if they pull out their gold, it's going to be using it to buy and sell something real close to somebody else real close. So they're just going to bring that gold right back. And so he decided, the goldsmith, that he would just borrow a little of that. He could always, because there was always more coming in than going out, he could always replenish it. Well, another thing in his favor is that some of these rich noblemen had figured out that it would be easier if the goldsmith would just give them a receipt for how much gold was in there and actually give them multiple receipts representing fractions of their whole overall holding, where all the receipts together would add up to the total. And then instead of having to come into the village, get the gold out, transfer it over, maybe through a bandit infested area like Sherwood Forest, for example, with a robin in his hoods, why don't we just take this little receipt for the gold and give that, and it's much easier to hide, much easier to transport. So what started happening is a lot of these wealthy folks would just swap these receipts, and then if someone did want the gold to use farther out, they could just come present the receipt and get the gold. So these receipts became a form of money because they fulfilled all the functions, but it represented a certain amount of gold in the vault. Well, at the point, though, that the goldsmith actually pulled some of the gold out, if everyone had brought in their receipts and wanted to get gold in return, there wouldn't have been enough. Now, that's kind of the way modern banking works, not to burst your bubble, but that's really the way it works. That's called fractional reserve banking. So goldsmiths are nothing more than ancient bankers, to kind of think about it in terms of money. Now, let's kind of backtrack and talk about the first two categories here of money, different types of money. And this is, first of all, related to the private sector, and then we'll get into government. So there was commodity money. That's like the gold. There was commodity-backed or representative money. That's really the receipts that were used for money in the goldsmith story. And then there's something called fiat money or fiat money. Now, fiat money is not the private sector as much. It can be by large banks, but in general, the last one is typically going to be government. Now, I do have some links where you can go and look at the history of money if you want to. And so this is some pretty good links. And then certainly what we think of as modern day digital currency is Bitcoin, those kind of cryptocurrencies. More might be said about that later. Now, as I've already mentioned, national governments got into the money scheme, if you will. And so governments actually issued pieces of metal that would say this is a certain value and a certain purity. And so those became coins. That was the Lydian stater, was the first, or the coin that we have, actually still have one of that's earliest we know of. Lydia was in the area of modern day Turkey. And then commodity-backed money, that's what was called gold certificates, silver certificates. They're still, collectors sometimes have those. I actually have a silver certificate somewhere. I'm not exactly sure where it is, but I do have it. But nowadays, if you look on your green pieces of paper, it doesn't say it's redeemable in gold or silver. It just says this note can be used for all debts, public and private. And what makes that the case is the government says it is. So that's by government decree. That's what fiat means. Now, another good source for money, and a little history of that is the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco. Okay, well, let's go to the modern time period. What is actually money today? Well, it's coins and currency in circulation, transaction, or checkable deposits and other near monies. Well, you say, well, cryptocurrency's not on here. Well, cryptocurrency still is up to debate where it actually fulfills the functions of money enough to be money. One of the big issues is that store of value. Cryptocurrency fluctuates so much that that's kind of what's holding it back at this point from being considered money. Um, in in our ideas of looking at money, notice some things that you don't see in there. One is checks, credit cards, and debit cards. Now, let's backtrack just a second. The check you write, the physical check itself, again, I know this is mainly electronic now, but the electronic transfer of funds or whatever, if it's a physical thing like a physical check, that check is not money, but it's the deposit that you're using to withdraw the money and transfer. It's that checkable deposit account at a bank that is money. And what about plastic money like credit cards? Well, credit cards, technically, that's not money. It's a temporary loan. You are borrowing money from the bank that issues that credit card, and then hopefully at the end of the month when you get your bill, you pay it off before you're charged some kind of penalty for fee for not paying the whole balance. Debit cards, same thing as checks. The physical debit card itself is not money, but the account that it's tied to, that checkable deposit account or savings account, is certainly money. So in the United States, we have categories of money. The most narrow definition of money is M1, and it really highlights that medium of exchange function. So again, we're looking at coins and currency in circulation. That's important for later. Checkable deposits, that's your checking account, and then traveler's checks. There's a few other minor things in there, but for the most part, that's M1. Then we look at a little broader measure of money, and that's M2. It highlights that store of value function, but it does include all of M1, but then it brings in things that are not quite as liquid, like savings deposits and small denomination time deposits. That's CDs. Now, by small denomination, that's CDs of 100, less than 100,000 in the amount. So that's small denomination. And we've got some other things like money market mutual funds that are in there. And I do provide links there if you want to further explore how money is categorized nowadays.